Devoted to the principle of conspicuous waste, and on which all society is based, Prestane of Prestane had fitted his Victorian mansion in Central Park with elevators, house phones, dumbwaiters, and all the other labor-saving devices which jaunting had made obsolete. The servants in that giant gingerbread castle walked dutifully from room to room, opening and closing doors and climbing stairs. Prestine of Prestine arose, dressed with the aid of his valet and barber, descended to the morning room with the aid of an elevator, and breakfasted, assisted by a butler, footman, and waitresses. He left the morning room and entered his study. In an age when communication systems were virtually extinct, when it was far easier to jaunt directly to a man's office for a discussion than to telephone or telegraph, Prestine still maintained an antique telephone switchboard with an operator in his study. "Get me Dagenham," he said. The operator struggled and at last put a call through to Dagenham Couriers, Inc. This was a 100 million credit organization of bonded jaunters guaranteed to perform any public or confidential service for any principal. Their fee was 1 credit per mile. Dagenham guaranteed to get a courier around the world in 80 minutes. 80 seconds after Prestine's call was put through, a Dagenham courier appeared on the private jaunt stage outside Prestine's home, was identified and admitted through the jaunt-proof labyrinth behind the entrance. Like every member of the Dagenham staff, he was an M-class jaunter, capable of teleporting 1,000 miles a jump indefinitely and familiar with thousands of jaunt coordinates. He was a senior specialist in chicanery and cajolery, trained to the incisive efficiency and boldness that characterized Dagenham couriers and reflected the ruthlessness of its founder. "Prestine," he said, wasting no time on protocol. "I want to hire Dagenham. Ready, Prestine." "No, not you. I want Saul Dagenham himself." "Mr. Dagenham no longer gives personal services for less than 100,000 credits. The amount will be 5 times that." "Fee or percentage?" "Both. 250,000 fee and 250,000 guaranteed against 10% of the total amount of risk." "Agreed. The matter?" "Pyre." "Spell it, please." "The name means nothing to you?" "No." "Good. It will to Dagenham. Pyre. Capital Pyr. Pyr. Capital E. Pronounce pyre, as in funeral pyre. Tell Dagenham we've located the pyre. He's engaged to get it at all costs through a man named Foyle. Gulliver Foyle." The courier produced a tiny silver pearl, a memo bead, repeated Prestine's instructions into it, and left without another word. Prestine turned to his telephone operator. "Get me Regis Sheffield," he directed. 10 minutes after the call went through to Regis Sheffield's law office, a young law clerk appeared on Prestine's private jaunt stage, was vetted, and admitted through the maze. He was a bright young man with a scrubbed face and the expression of a delighted rabbit. "Excuse the delay, Prestine," he said. "We got your call in Chicago, and I'm still only a D-class 500-miler. Took me a while getting here." "Is your chief trying a case in Chicago?" "Chicago, New York, and Washington. He's been on the jaunt from court to court all morning. We fill in for him when he's in another court." "I want to retain him." "Honored, Prestine, but Mr. Sheffield's pretty busy." "Not too busy for Pyre." "Sorry, sir, I don't quite know." "You don't, but Sheffield will. Just tell him Pyre as in funeral pyre, and the amount of his fee." "Which is?" "250,000 retainer and 250,000 guaranteed against 10% and the total amount of risk." "And what performance is required of Mr. Sheffield?" "To prepare every known legal device for kidnapping a man and holding him against the army, the navy, and the police." "Quiet. And the man?" "Gulliver Foyle." The law clerk muttered quick notes into a memo bead, thrust the bead into his ear, listened, nodded, and departed. Prestine left the study and ascended the plush stairs to his daughter's suite to pay his morning respects. In the homes of the wealthy, the rooms of the female members were blind, without windows or doors, open only to the jaunting of intimate members of the family. Thus was morality maintained and chastity defended. But since Olivia Prestine was herself blind to normal sight, she could not jaunt. Consequently, her suite was entered through doors closely guarded by ancient retainers in the Prestine clan livery. Olivia Prestine was a glorious albino. Her hair was white silk, her skin was white satin, her nails, her lips, and her eyes were coral. She was beautiful and blind in a wonderful way, for she could see in the infrared only, from 7,500 angstroms to 1 millimeter wavelengths. She saw heat waves, magnetic fields, radio waves, radar, sonar, and electromagnetic fields. She was holding her grand levee in the drawing-room of the suite. She sat in a brocaded wing chair, sipping tea, guarded by her duenna, holding court, chatting with a dozen men and women standing about the room. She looked like an exquisite statue of marble and coral, her blind eyes flashing as she saw and yet did not see. She saw the drawing-room as a pulsating flow of heat emanations ranging from hot highlights to cool shadows. She saw the dazzling magnetic patterns of clocks, phones, lights, and locks. She saw and recognized people by the characteristic heat patterns radiated by their faces and bodies. She saw around each head an aura of the faint electromagnetic brain pattern and, sparkling through the heat radiation of each body, the ever-changing tone of muscle and nerve. Prestine did not care for the artists, musicians, and fops Olivia kept about her, but he was pleased to see a scattering of society notables this morning. There was a Sears Roebuck, a Gillette, young Sidney Kodak, who would one day be Kodak of Kodak, a Hubigant, Buick of Buick, and R.H. Macy 16, head of the powerful Saxe-Gimbel clan. Prestine paid his respects to his daughter and left the house. He set off for his clan headquarters at 99 Wall Street in a coach and four driven by a coachman assisted by a groom, both wearing the Prestine trademark of red, black, and blue. The black P on a field of scarlet and cobalt was one of the most ancient and distinguished trademarks in the social register, rivaling the 57 of the Heinz clan and the RR of the Rolls-Royce dynasty in antiquity. The head of the Prestine clan was a familiar sight to New York jaunters. Iron gray, handsome, powerful, impeccably dressed and mannered in the old-fashioned style, Prestine of Prestine was the epitome of the social elect. For he was so exalted in station that he employed coachmen, grooms, hostlers, stable-boys, and horses to perform a function for him which ordinary mortals performed by jaunting. As men climbed the social ladder, they displayed their position by their refusal to jaunt. The newly adopted into a great commercial clan rode an expensive bicycle. A rising clansman drove a small sports car. The captain of a sept was transported in a chauffeur-driven antique from the old days, a vintage Bentley or Cadillac, or a towering Lagonda. An heir presumptive in direct line of succession to the clan chieftainship staffed a yacht or a plane. Prestine of Prestine, head of the clan Prestine, owned carriages, cars, yachts, planes, and trains. His position in society was so lofty that he had not jaunted in 40 years. Secretly, he scorned the bustling new rich like the Dagenhams and Sheffields, who still jaunted and were unashamed. Prestine entered the crenellated keep at 99 Wall Street that was Castle Prestine. It was staffed and guarded by his famous jaunt watch, all in clan livery. Prestine walked with the stately gait of a chieftain as they piped him to his office. Indeed, he was grander than a chieftain, as an importante government official awaiting audience discovered to his dismay. That unfortunate man leaped forward with the waiting crowd of petitioners as Prestine passed. "Mr. Prestine," he began, "I'm from the Internal Revenue Department. I must see you this Prestine cut him short with an icy stare. "There are thousands of Prestines," he pronounced. "All are addressed as Mr., but I am Prestine of Prestine, head of house and sept, first of the family, chieftain of the clan. I am addressed as Prestine, not Mr. Prestine. Prestine." He turned and entered his office, where his staff greeted him with a muted chorus. "Good morning, Prestine." Prestine nodded, smiled his basilisk smile, and seated himself behind the enthroned desk while the jaunt watch skirled their pipes and ruffled their drums. Prestine signaled for the audience to begin. The household equerry stepped forward with a scroll. Prestine disdained memo beads and all mechanical business devices. "Report on Clan Prestine Enterprises," the equerry began. "Common stock, high, 201.5, low, 201.25. Average quotations, New York, Paris, Ceylon, took..." Prestine waved his hand irritably. The equerry retired to be replaced by Black Rod. "Another Mr. Presto to be invested, Prestine." Prestine restrained his impatience and went through the tedious ceremony of swearing in the 497th Mr. Presto in the hierarchy of Prestine Prestos, who managed the shops in the Prestine Retail Division. Until recently, the man had had a face and body of his own. Now, after years of cautious testing and careful indoctrination, he had been elected to join the Prestos. After 6 months of surgery and psycho-conditioning, he was identical with the other 496 Mr. Prestos, and to the idealized portrait of Mr. Presto which hung behind Prestine's days. A kindly, honest man resembling Abraham Lincoln, a man who instantly inspired affection and trust. Around the world, purchasers entered an identical Prestine store and were greeted by an identical manager, Mr. Presto. He was rivaled but not surpassed by the Kodak clan's Mr. Quick and Montgomery Ward's Uncle Monty. When the ceremony was complete, Prestine arose abruptly to indicate that the public investiture was ended. The office was cleared of all but the high officials. Prestine paced, obviously repressing his seething impatience. He never swore, but his restraint was more terrifying than profanity. "Foil," he said in a suffocated voice. "A common sailor, dirt, dregs, gutter, scum. But that man stands between me and—" "If you please, Prestine," Blackrod interrupted timidly. "It's 11 o'clock, Eastern Time. 8 o'clock Pacific Time." "What?" "If you please, Prestine, may I remind you that there is a launching ceremony at 9 Pacific Time? You are to preside at the Vancouver shipyards." "Launching?" "Our new freighter, the Prestine Princess. It will take some time to establish three-dimensional broadcast contact with the shipyard, so we had better—" "I will attend in person." "In person?" Blackrod faltered. "But we cannot possibly fly to Vancouver in an hour, Prestine. "I will jaunt," Prestine of Prestine snapped. Such was his agitation. His appalled staff made hasty preparations. Messengers jaunted ahead to warn the Prestine offices across the country, and the private jaunt stages were cleared. Prestine was ushered to the stage within his New York office. It was a circular platform in a black-hung room with windows, a masking and concealment necessary to prevent unauthorized persons from discovering and memorizing coordinates. For the same reason, all homes and offices had one-way windows and confusion labyrinths behind their doors. To jaunt it was necessary, among other things, for a man to know exactly where he was and where he was going, or there was little hope of arriving anywhere alive. It was as possible to jaunt from an undetermined starting point as it was to arrive to the unknown destination. Like shooting a pistol, one had to know where to aim and which end of the gun to hold, but a glance through a window or door might be enough to enable a man to memorize the LES coordinate of a place. Prestine stepped on the stage, visualized the coordinates of his destination in the Philadelphia office, seeing the picture clearly and the position accurately. He relaxed and energized one concentrated thrust of will and belief toward the target. He jaunted. There was a dizzy moment in which his eyes blurred. The New York stage faded out of focus. The Philadelphia stage blurred into focus. There was a sensation of falling down and then up. He arrived. Blackrod and others of his staff arrived a respectful moment later. So, in jaunts of 1 and 200 miles each, Prestine crossed the continent and arrived outside the Vancouver shipping yards at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific Time. He had left New York at 11 a.m. He had gained 2 hours of daylight. This, too, was a commonplace in the jaunting world. The square mile of unfenced concrete, what fence would bar a jaunter, looked like a white table covered with black pennies neatly arranged in concentric circles. But on closer approach, the pennies enlarged into the 100-foot mouths of black pits dug deep into the bowels of the earth. Each circular mouth was rimmed with concrete buildings, offices, check rooms, canteens, changing rooms. These were the takeoff and landing pits, the dry dock and construction pits of the shipyards. Spaceships, like sailing vessels, were never designed to support their own weight unaided against the drag of gravity. Normal Terran gravity would crack the spine of a spaceship like an eggshell. The ships were built in deep pits, standing vertically in a network of catwalks and construction grids, braced and supported by anti-gravity screens. They took off from similar pits, riding the anti-grav beams upward like motes mounting the vertical shaft of a searchlight, until at last they reached the Roche limit and could thrust with their own jets. Landing spacecraft cut drive jets and rode the same beams downward into the pits. As the Prestine entourage entered the Vancouver yards, they would see which of the pits were in use. From some, the noses and hulls of spaceships extruded, raised a quarter-mile or halfway above ground by the anti-grav screens as workmen in the pits below brought their aft sections to particular operational levels. 3 Prestine V-class transports, Vega, Vestal, and Vorga, stood partially raised near the center of the yards, undergoing flaking and replating at the heat-lighting flicker of torches around Vorga indicated. At the concrete building marked Entry, the Prestine entourage stopped before a sign that read, "You are endangering your life if you enter these premises unlawfully. You have been warned." Visitor badges were distributed to the party, and even Prestine of Prestine received a badge. He dutifully pinned it on, for he well knew what the result of entry without such a protective badge would be. The entourage continued, winding its way through pits until it arrived at O3, where the pit mouth was decorated with bunting in the Prestine colors and a small grandstand had been erected. Prestine was welcomed and, in turn, greeted with his various officials. The Prestine band struck up the clan song, bright and brassy, but one of the instruments appeared to have gone insane. It struck a brazen note that blared louder and louder until it engulfed the entire band in the surprise exclamations. Only then did Prestine realize that it was not an instrument sounding, but the shipyard alarm. An intruder was in the yard, someone not wearing identification or visitor's badge. The radar field of the protection system was tripped and the alarm sounded. Through the raucous bellow of the alarm, Prestine could hear a multiple of pops as the yard guards jaunted from the grandstand and took positions around the square mile of concrete field. His own jaunt watch closed in around him, looking wary and alert. A voice began blaring on the PA, coordinating defense. Unknown in yard at E for Edward 9. E for Edward 9, moving west on foot. Someone must have broken in, Blackrod shouted. I'm aware of that, Prestine answered calmly. He must be a stranger if he's not jaunting in here. I'm aware of that also. Unknown approach, D for David 5. D for David 5, still on foot. D for David 5, alert. What in God's name is he up to? Blackrod exclaimed. You are aware of my rules, sir, Prestine said coldly. No associate of the Prestine clan may take the name of the divinity in vain. You forget yourself. Unknown now approaching C for Charlie 5. Now approaching C for Charlie 5. Blackrod touched Prestine's arm. He's coming this way, Prestine. Will you take cover, please? I will not. Prestine, there have been assassination attempts before. 3 of them. How do I get to the top of this stand? Prestine! Hold me up. Aided by Blackrod, still protesting hysterically, Prestine climbed to the top of the grandstand to watch the power of the Prestine clan in action against danger. Below, he could see workmen in white jumpers swarming out of the pits to watch the excitement. Guards were appearing as they jaunted from distant sectors toward the focal point of the action. Unknown moving south toward B for Baker 3. B for Baker 3. Prestine watched the B3 pit. A figure appeared, dashing swiftly toward the pit, veering, dodging, bowling forward. It was a giant man in hospital blues with a wild thatch of black hair and a distorted face that appeared in the distance to be painted in livid colors. His clothes were flickering like heat lightning as the protective induction field of the defense system seared him. B for Baker 3, alert! B for Baker 3! B for Baker 3, close in! There were shouts and a distant rattle of shots, the pneumatic whine of scope guns. 6 workmen in white leaped for the intruder. He scattered them like 9-pins and drove on and on toward B3 where the nose of Vorga showed. He was a lightning bolt driving through workmen and guards, pivoting, bludgeoning, boring forward implacably. Suddenly he stopped, reached inside his flaming jacket, and withdrew a black canister. With the convulsive gesture of an animal wreathing in death throes, he bit the end of the canister and hurled it, straight and true on a high arc toward Vorga. The next instant, he was struck down. Explosive! Take cover! Explosive! Take cover! Explosive! Take cover! Prestine! Blackrod squawked. Prestine shook him off and watched the canister curve up and then down toward the nose of Vorga, spinning and glinting in the cold sunlight. At the edge of the pit, it was caught by the anti-grav beam and flicked upwards as by a giant invisible thumbnail. Up and up and up it whirled, 100, 500, and 1,000 feet. Then there was a blinding flash, and an instant later a titanic clap of thunder that smote ears and jarred teeth and bone. Prestine picked himself up and ascended the grandstand to the launching podium. He placed his finger on the launching button of the Prestine Princess. Bring me that man, if he's still alive, he said to Blackrod. He pressed the button. I christen thee the Prestine Power, he called in triumph.